Ghosts have somehow moved into my day.
Hello everyone, Pamela Zero here. Welcome to Duck Duck Goose, a podcast about the Visitor series. This episode includes chapters 29 and 30 of the book Ose. Thanks for coming along on Ose's journey. Chapter 29, Selris, Hutlam, Kesu. Selris followed the woman closely down the narrow alley behind the noodle shop. He had seen her 3 times now, and there was something that nagged him about her. Her stride, or the way she tossed her head in disdain when a well-worn begbot raised a sign towards her. Selris picked up his pace a bit to keep up with the stranger. The woman was halfway down the alley when she turned around and threw something at him that struck his leg. She took off running. Selris started to follow, but realized that one leg wasn't moving. He looked down. He was covered in a clear goo on his right leg from hip to toe that spread out in a small puddle on the alley surface. It had adhered him to the ground quite firmly. She had hurled a stickball at him. It took Selris a half hour to work his foot away from the alley pavement, and another 20 minutes for him to make it with his one stiff leg back to his lodgings. Getting up to his room was a bit tricky, but he ignored the stare of his proprietor and pulled himself up the 2 flights of stairs. Luckily, his key was in his left pocket and not blocked by the goo. Warm, soapy water finally removed the gunk from his leg, and he changed his clothes. Part of him understood the woman's actions. A strange man in ill-fitting clothes followed her down an alleyway. She probably thought she was defending herself. On the other hand, stickballs were not the easiest defensive weapon to acquire. Why waste a stickball on a stranger who may or may not wish her ill? He had not been following her that closely. Selris was mulling over the various pros and cons of continuing to keep an eye out for the woman when there was a soft knock on his door. He froze. No one knew he was here. An interview with Yulish had aired that morning, and she looked distressed as she murmured about the incredible stress it must have been for him to be consort. The current theory bandied about by the media was that Selris had suffered a mental breakdown and had wandered off, delirious. Selris was certain that the service had no such delusions. A quick look at his service financial accounts would show the transfer of funds, and the fact that he was no longer in the temple and not visible anywhere in town meant that he had bolted. As long as he did not make any public fuss, the search for him would be quiet and low-key. If he dared to voice his concerns to the press, he would be hunted publicly and arrested on sight. Selris tiptoed to the door and listened carefully. There was silence on the other side. He waited. A loud series of knocks jarred him, and he yanked open the door to see the woman from the alley, her hood pulled down over her face. She brushed past him and stood by the window in his small room. "Selris, what happened? Why have you left the temple, and why does Yulish say you've gone mad?" Selris recognized Bussett's voice as soon as she spoke. "Bussett, are you all right?" "Close the door." Bussett waited until Selris had shut the door and then pulled her hood away from her face. "I'm fine. Why did you leave the temple? I thought you and Yulish had fulfilled the prophecy and were well on your way to the history books." "Let's trade. Why did you throw a stickball at me this morning?" "I didn't realize it was you. Some creepy guy was following me, so I stuck you. I didn't place you until you took off your hat going into this place." Bussett stopped talking and looked at Selris, her question still in her eyes. Selris paused, trying to think of a way to answer Bussett. If he told her he knew she was a fraud, he risked losing whatever information he could weasel out of her as well, as she tried to keep up the con. If he didn't tell her, he would have to come up with an alternate reason why he left the temple. His mind raced. His hesitation gave him away. Bussett looked at him with suspicion on her face and then nodded. "She told you about the con. Yulish told you." "I half guessed, and she confirmed it, but I still would like to know why you left." Selris knew exactly why she had left, but there was no point in letting her know he had been the one to unlock her door so she could escape. He might be able to use that information later. Bussett grimaced. "I decided that I was done playing first. I could handle the experiments well enough until they started slicing my fingers to get at my blood. Cyrus pretended to be clueless. Maybe he could present himself as a sympathetic figure and gain her trust, or even bring her back to the temple and use her as proof of the con. He was mulling over the best way to do so when Bussett's next statement shattered his plan. What I can't figure out is how the source started glowing. That wasn't in any of our strategy sessions. Cyrus stared at her. What do you mean? I thought the glowing source was part of the con. Nope. Did they do a particular ritual or something that made it glow? Cyrus shook his head. No, we just snuck down there and, No, I don't know, Bussett said. What? Had sex on the stone, and it started glowing. What? That was it? Bussett paced the room. After everything I went through, Eula just had to screw you on the stone and it worked? I had sex on the stone. Part of their stupid experiments. It didn't glow for me. I had sex by the stone, on the stone, near the stone. Nothing. Bussett fumed. They had to have rigged something. Maybe they stuck a light down there, but if they did, they'd have to hide it pretty well. I mean, someone would notice if there was suddenly a light tucked by the base of the source. Cyrus felt slightly ill. No, actually they wouldn't. Eulich had them build stairs all around the source so she could... Cyrus broke off mid-sentence and shook his head. So she could walk to the top of the source from any angle. He flushed at how gullible he had been, how eager to please, and how many times he had been completely taken in by her act. There must be a light under the source, and all he would need to do is show the guards. I need to get back to the temple and see what is under those stairs. I'd like to go with you, said Bussett. Her face was a mask. Cyrus looked at her in surprise. Really? Are you sure? If you're found out, they'll keep you, and I'm not sure Eulish will allow you to remain unharmed. Cyrus looked at Bussett carefully. She was hiding something. I'm sure, replied Bussett. I need to see for myself what damage Eulish has caused, and maybe I can help you, reveal her as a false first. I don't think you understand. If we remove Eulish as the first, that will make the service want to continue the experiments on you. Not if they know I'm part of the con. An innocent bystander, taken in by her conniving sister and an abusive man, forced to play the first until the guilt overwhelmed me and I ran away. Cyrus was struck with a thought that he should have had the moment that Eulish revealed the con. His mind turned the thought over and looked at it from every angle, but there was no escaping its logic. Bussett, if you're not the first, and Eulish is not the first, then who is? Bussett smiled coldly. I'm sure Buck knows. Perhaps when we're in the temple, we can pay him a visit and ask him. Kester, the temple, Hutlam. Down in the immense cavern below the source, Kester's breath was shallow. He felt his stomach rebel as the substance-drenched technician in front of Headlast Point ran a finger inside its mouth, dredging out enough black goo to speak clearly. The work is unfinished, burbled the offered. Its eyes were wild. We are technicians. We must finish our quota. You must let us work. Headlast Point smiled. Kester could see his chest motionless under his deep green robe and realized the Headlast was holding his breath. Rejoice, Technician Wilsk, said Poyne through clenched teeth. We have come to ask you to awaken the substance, to once more power the emissaries. Only 24 a day, for we must be certain all is well after the substance's slumber. The technician grimaced. 24, too few. We cannot meet quota. Poyne nodded, a look of sympathy appearing on his face, even as he squinted through the fumes. I understand. The quota is important. Perhaps we can adjust the time frames a bit so we meet the quota over a longer span of time. Maybe over a month rather than a day. The circle held its collective self still. Technicians were rigidly specific. The quota, established centuries ago, could not be changed. Kester thought it an arbitrary number, while other lasts spent their careers tracing the history of the quota back to the Great Fire. Whoever said it, the quota was a concept the technicians lived by. This approach of changing the timing rather than the number to be recharged had been Last Kester's idea. If it didn't work, the technicians would start full production before the source's renewal was fully verified. No one knew what would happen then. The technician blinked. Substance splashed from its eyelids. Then it nodded. Kester kept his face still as triumph surged through him. Headless Point bowed to the technician, then turned, heading back to the safety of the landing. The circle followed him, each last doing their best to hurry without seeming to rush. Once they reached the bottom of the staircase, they clambered up, arranging themselves on the landing and first step. "We bear witness to the power of the substance," boomed Poyne. "Begin your work, technicians. Power our emissaries that they may spread the greatness of the source and substance out into the world." Kester leaned forward. The cavern floor heaved, then resolved into over 100 technicians unfolding from the floor, standing, stretching, tugging at their brethren still unaware of the call. The air grew thick with the smell of vomit as they purged themselves of the substance that had filled their stomachs during their dormancy. One by one, they lumbered over to the bank of the river, the slosh and squish of their movement adding another layer to the roar of noise buffeting the lasts. Technician Wilsk strode into the river of substance. It stood rigid against the current. Kester had no idea how. It was joined by 3 other technicians who supported Wilsk as it battled the flow. The 4 of them walked up the river, fighting the current, holding their ground when one faltered, moving relentlessly when each was solid in their footing. They reached the waterfall. Wilsk reached down into the chaotic substance at the base of the falls and pulled out a power orb. It was blackened by substance. Wilsk turned around and raised the orb over its head. It shouted a long series of syllables that made no sense to Kester. As one, the technicians lining the bank stepped into the river. Wilsk waded forward and placed the orb in the current. It disappeared under the surface, then bobbed up. Kester could see the orb starting to glow, light leaking through the coating of the substance. He glanced at Headless Poyne, who was staring up at where the substance came out of the wall. Kester looked up and saw a brief glint, a power orb emerging from the wall, sent down from the power room. It tumbled into the falling substance. Wilsk plucked orbs from the base of the falls, steadied by the technicians attending him. The technicians in the river waited until the orbs reached them, then snatched the now bright orbs out of the substance and waded to the bank of the river. In a few minutes, Wilsk stopped pulling orbs up and began moving back downstream. The technicians holding orbs headed to the freshwater stream at the side of the cavern to wash them. Kester's shoulders dropped as he let out a long breath. Wilsk had stopped. Kester had lost count of the globes tossed into the current, but he guessed around 3 dozen. Wilsk had stopped late, but at least it had stopped. The repowered orbs would be cleaned, then carried up the stairs to be pushed through a small hole into the power room, to roll along the counter and be packed by the upstairs technicians. Kester found the whole process ludicrous. Why not just pump the source upstairs to the power room and let the orbs recharge up there? Why did the technicians down here have to expose themselves to substance until they changed beyond recognition? He edged his way over to Headless Poyne. "Last Kester," murmured Poyne. "Your face betrays your distress." "I'm not distressed." Kester kept his tone light. "I seek your wisdom, Headlast. Tell me again why the ritual of repowering the orbs requires such sacrifice from the technicians?" Poyne grimaced. "Kester, you know as well as I that the mysteries of the source and substance are beyond our ken. The orbs are recharged this way because that is how they have always been recharged. There is no rhyme or reason to it." Kester opened his mouth to protest, but was interrupted by a disturbance over by the freshwater stream. The technicians were huddled together in a large mass, murmurs rising to shouts. Technician Wilsk strode out of the crowd, holding an orb in its hand. It was glowing with a feeble light that pulsed once, twice, and then dimmed. "Headless Poin!" yelled Wilsk, substance spraying from its mouth. "The orbs are not truly recharging." Chapter 30. Duck. The Estate. Punjar. Duck woke up early again. They had been here on the estate for a few weeks now, but she was still getting used to the light from the first sun shining on her bed each morning. Mama Two and Papa Two were still sleeping. That's all they seemed to do these days. Duck leaped out of bed, sparing a moment to toss her bed covers around in an approximation of making her bed. If she hurried, she could make it to the kitchen before Srix was done making breakfast for the household. Minutes later, she closed the front door to the little guest house quietly and then raced across the lawns towards the main house. The kitchen entrance was on the side of a small hill that the house sat upon. It looked like a door set into the side of the slope, with nothing fancy about it. Duck ran towards the door until she was a few meters away and then stopped suddenly and walked the rest of the way with exaggerated slowness. She had run into someone coming out of the door the day before and had been told to approach slowly. Duck pushed the door open and entered the calm oasis of the kitchen. Outside, the suns shifted in their daily dance, and birds whirred around chirping, but in Srix's kitchen, it was still and silent. Early mornings were sacred. The kitchen staff moved with deliberate precision, treating each moment spent creating a dish as if it were a prayer. Duck watched Srix carefully. It tasted the contents of a large pot on one of the cookers. Duck nodded. That was the mushy stuff some of the staff had for their breakfast. She was on time. People were scattered around the kitchen, moving quietly, gracefully, as they prepared the morning meal for the household. One whole wall was covered with cupboards, and Duck walked over to the bottom row and counted 3 over from the left. She opened the cupboard and pulled out a mesh bag of green fruit. It took some effort for her to get it up on the huge table in the middle of the room, but she succeeded. "Ah, Duck, good morning." Srix's voice was melodic and gentle. It turned from the cooker and moved over to the table. Duck watched in fascination as Srix's multiple foot appendages appeared from the pinched bottom of his carapace, lifting its body off the floor and scuttling it forward with a rasping sound. Duck watched to see if the carapace tilted or swayed as Srix moved over to the table, but it stayed completely straight. "Srix, your foot pods are really fun," Duck said softly as she climbed up on the stool by the table and waited for Srix to cut the mesh bag open. It did so with a click of its pincers, and Duck set to work rolling each fruit on the table until the outer skin split. Once she had split all the skins, she slowly ran her finger around the inside of the skin until it was separate from the lavender flesh and could be pulled off completely. She loved the sweet, spicy smell that rose from the fruit as she peeled it. As she worked, she heard a soft whistling start, a simple tune that was soon joined by a hummed countermelody. In minutes, the kitchen was full of music, each person making what sound they could to add to the beauty of the moment. Duck focused on her work and made small peeping sounds at random moments, intent on being a part of things, but a bit lost as to whether she was adding or subtracting from the whole. She put the last peeled fruit on the pile she had made and realized that her pile had gotten shorter. She looked over to see Uncle Ose sitting beside her, carving up the lavender fruit into simple shapes and arranging them on a platter. Duck waved at him. Her hands felt stiff from the drying fruit pulp that covered them. As the song slowly ended, Duck closed her eyes. There was a moment every day, after the last note from the morning song faded, when the whole kitchen seemed to hang in time. Everything, everyone, seems to be floating above daily concerns, and for a brief moment it felt like they all expanded to contain everything that was good and wise. Then Srix rang the bell to announce that service had started, and the kitchen descended into organized chaos for the rest of the day. "Are you enjoying your stay, Duck?" Ose's voice was hard to hear over the sudden noise of the kitchen staff bustling about. Duck opened her eyes and nodded yes. "I have my own room here, and there are lots of leaves with colors falling from the trees." She hopped off her stool carefully, holding her hands up as she went over to a sink to wash off the pulp. She loved living here. Maybe Strix would let her stay and work in the kitchens when everyone went back to thread. Duck didn't think so, but it was fun to have the dream. Duck came back to the table and perched back on her stool to watch Ose. "The fruit is pretty. There are a lot of shapes." Ose held up a crescent-shaped piece. "These are all cut into the shapes of different people's patterns. This is from my father's pattern. You can see a bit of it on his neck in his portrait." "The picture in the front hall?" asked Duck. Lady Wennel had said it was of her husband and that he was dead but lived on in her pattern. Duck didn't quite understand what that meant, but maybe she could ask. Lady Wennel was nice. Ose picked up another piece. "That very picture. Here is my mother's star shape. If you look at her cheeks, you will see it very faintly. This is Uncle Si's jagged line, and this is my spiral. Every Poonj has a different pattern, and you can usually find the shapes on their clothing." Duck frowned. "How do you keep track of all the shapes?" "That is the job of the Lucents and the jewels." "Uncle Si is a Lucent," said Duck. "What's a jewel?" Ose picked up another piece of fruit and continued carving. "Lucents take care of people when their patterns are growing. Jewels take care of people when they thread each other." Duck nodded. She hopped off the stool and then turned back towards him. "Does it hurt when people thread each other?" Ose blinked. "Sometimes, but the jewels are there to be called upon if there are any problems." "Did it hurt when you and Uncle Si threaded each other?" "A bit, but we were not very smart, and we didn't call the opal when we should have," said Ose. "The opal is our jewel. Anyone can ask assistance from any Lucent, but we are all assigned a jewel, and we can ask our own jewel for help with any problems with threading." Duck nodded. "Opal is a pretty name. Is your opal nice?" "The opal? Yes. It's two people, actually. Here, this is what they look like." Ose pulled out his comb and pulled up an image of a man and a woman to show Duck. The little girl stared at the image for a while and then looked at Ose. "I think that they are very wonderful. I'm glad that they are nice." She smiled at Uncle Ose and skipped across the kitchen to the stairs that led upstairs. Lady Wennel was usually having breakfast about now, and Duck wanted to see if she could spot the stars on her cheeks. The Opal, Laurel, Punjar. Laika inspected her kit one more time before they left the house. The rolling case was filled with clothing, makeup, jewelry, and nearly anything anyone could need when courting another Poonj. Her life partner, Facet, had a kit as well. His was filled with everything needed to assist in the process of threading. Together, they were the Opal, guide to some of the most prestigious Poonj on the planet. There was no room for error. She smiled at Facet as they went out the front door of their narrow house. Laika didn't particularly want to live in such a fashionable neighborhood, but appearances must be kept up. She stood peacefully next to Facet, tall and slim in her ornate blue-green dress, as the two of them waited for their transport to arrive. A curtain in the window of the house across the street pulled back, and a little girl waved. Facet bowed in response, and the girl's face split into giggles. Laika looked at her partner tenderly. She could have done much worse. Decades ago, when they had met, Laika's pattern had been a simple blue wave. The color was charming, if a bit pale. Back then, at 18 cycles old, her life was simple, filled with studies and work on the farm. If she dreamed at all, it was about becoming a bank teller in the small town nearby. Laika had been accepting threads for nearly 10 cycles, but none had ever shown a hint of sinking. When she met her future partner at a threading party, he was just another male. Threading parties were common in the more rural areas of Punjar. Finding a partner could be difficult in the countryside, with farms spread so far apart. Every few months, someone would open their house for a night of dancing and threading. Single Poonj of either sex would sit in a row with one arm and hand bare. Hopeful suitors would walk the line, threading every bare hand or arm. Laika found the threading parties boring, but her parents insisted she attend. When a nondescript male stopped before her, and let a hair-thin green thread fall on the back of her hand. She didn't even spare him a glance. When her own pattern flared briefly, she looked up, surprised. The boy standing before her was nothing special. She felt a tingling on her wrist and looked down to see the last bit of his thread disappear into her skin. Her pattern reacted again, shining with an intensity she hadn't seen before. Leica felt a bit queasy and then actively ill as the boy's thread found a nerve in her hand and followed it. It moved through her, leaving a trail like ice, cold and alien. The local wise woman, named Jur, came over. "You've gone a bit white there, dear." "It sank," whispered Leica. Inside her, something tiny slithered about, relentless and cunning. She clenched her jaw and breathed heavily through her nose. Jur nodded. "All right then, let's get you upstairs so you can lie down for a bit while we see where this goes." The older woman got Leica to her feet and helped her upstairs to a bedroom. By the time Leica got up the stairs, she was barely able to walk. Jur pulled the covers down on the bed before Leica fell onto it. A few minutes later, Leica's body went completely out of her conscious control. "Who did you come with, dear?" Jur asked. "My brother, my brother," gasped Leica. "What's his name, dear?" Jur pulled the covers over Leica and put a hand on the girl's forehead. Leica tried to speak, but her jaw was locked. She had taken the classes as a child at school that explained what could sometimes happen if a thread sank, but the reality was far worse than what she had expected. She tried to speak again, but only managed to grunt. Jur nodded. "That thread is really going to town, isn't it? All right then, don't you fret. I'll stay here with you. You'll be fine, hon." Leica noticed movement in the doorway. It was the boy who had threaded her. "Is she all right?" he asked, his voice hesitant. "Your thread sank," said Jur. "We will see how far it gets. Please go and get her brother." The boy nodded and left. Leica's eyes widened and her breath came faster. "It's all right, dear. Give it a good fight now. No use letting it stay unless it's strong enough to weave its way completely in." Leica lay rigid on the bed, battling to regain control of her body. Eventually she fell asleep, teeth gritted, fists clenched. When she woke with the sunrise the next day, her pattern had changed. Her simple blue pattern had become a shimmering, shifting radiance of mostly turquoise, with a few greens and purples washing through now and then. Leica herself was different as well. Her eyes reflected the new colors of her pattern, a green and blue whorl that looked striking against her deep brown hair. The boy that had threaded her had been sequestered in a separate room downstairs. When a thread sank, there was always the danger of damage. Some people took it hard. The custom was to keep the two possible partners separate until the thread either completely merged with the new host's pattern or was rejected. Sometimes the thread did not survive sinking. Sometimes the punj did not survive threading. Having a host and a symbiote was difficult enough for a body to handle. Adding another version of the symbiote was dangerous at best. Most of the time, if a thread sank, it simply added its own pattern to the existing pattern of the other person. The diffident boy's thread had caused a different reaction in Leica. Sometimes the combination of two symbiotes resulted in a pattern that was not just combined, but changed. Leica's pattern had widened, and the colors shifted into a range of hues rather than just one color. Her new iridescent pattern was a type called jeweled, and implied that the relationship between Leica and the boy was much more than a normal pairing. When Leica regained consciousness, her family was there, filling the small room. Her dad looked proud in his own way, and her mom was sobbing and talking at the same time. "She's always been such a good girl, always done her chores. I don't know where this is coming from. She's a simple lass. We don't have any jeweled in our family." "We do now," Leica's brother muttered, as he quickly ate everything he could pilfer off the table of food in the corner of the room. "I'd been hoping that Leica would partner with someone and bring him back to work the farm," her father grumbled. "Looks like she's going to go a bit further afield than that." "Indeed she is." Jur nodded and pointed to Leica's arm. "See how the pattern is shifting shape as well as color? That's a powerful pairing there. Your girl will want for nothing in life." Leica shook her head slowly from side to side. I just want to go home. I can still fight this, right? Her voice was weak, but at least she could speak again. No, lass, said Jor, her face solemn. By the faces, we're past that point now. Leica turned her head and quietly cried. The door to the room opened and Jor nodded to the man outside. Bring the boy up. She turned to the family. All right now, everyone. Time to go wait downstairs. Leica's mother started crying again, and she kissed her daughter's cheek before she left. The father and brother walked out without a word, though the father stopped for a moment at the foot of Leica's bed. The room felt empty after they left. When the boy arrived, Leica's eyes widened. His pattern had changed as well, and shimmered with the same intensity as her own. Jor had patted her hand. No use in fretting now, lass. Whatever happens next is under the gaze of the gods. Leica pulled her mind back to the present as a transport pulled up, the auto doors opening gracefully. She looked at her partner, Facet, and tried to find the unassuming boy that had threaded her all those cycles ago. He smiled at her and offered his hand to help her into the transport. The boy was long gone, but she loved the calm, focused man that he had become. Here and now, my love, said Facet. She smiled at the visitor phrase that had become commonplace. It was the eve of the fire festival, and the next 10 days were filled with parties and dances. They needed to be present to maintain their status as jewels. Tonight was dinner at Corius's and Hyrus's house, a long-held tradition. Leica stepped lightly into the transport and sat calmly, smiling at her partner. Perhaps Osei and Sai would be there. The Opal had been working with them since the two were children. It would be good to make sure all was well with Sai after the debacle at the sanctuary. Thank you for listening to Osei, Book 2 of the Visitor series. Osei was written by Pamela Zero. This podcast was recorded and edited by Pamela Zero. The song Ghost was written, sung, and produced by Pamela Zero. Background music is called Insight, and it's by Megan Wofford. Osei is available in paperback on Amazon. Please be sure to like and subscribe and visit thevisitorseries.com for more info. Thanks, everyone. I'll talk to you soon.